Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, excellencies, delegates of the United Nations General Assembly. As we meet at this venerable forum, the final election rallies are being held in Germany, a long election campaign. The day after tomorrow, 60 million Germans are called upon to elect a new parliament. They will decide on new coalitions and the successor of a federal chancellor who has governed Germany for 16 years. Distinguished colleagues, at this time of political transition in my country, I would like to assure you that also after this election, Germany remains a country that is aware of its international responsibility and shoulders it. And there are two compelling reasons for that. Firstly, we Germans do not forget that the political and economic rebirth after 2 world wars and our journey to re-enter the international community after all the horrors for which my country had been responsible, and finally our peaceful reunification. This, Germany's path of fortune, was only possible with the support of our neighbors and partners. Secondly, we are convinced and remain convinced that the path to a more peaceful future, the resolution of the major issues facing humanity, will require much, much more cooperation from the international community. The preamble of Germany's basic law formulates our aspiration in brief but precise terms to promote world peace as an equal partner in a united Europe. This aspiration, this obligation, ladies and gentlemen, is one shared by every German government. And this is why it was important to me to come to New York today as federal president and convey this Germany's message to the international community. Our partners can rely on us, and our competitors will need to keep reckoning with us. To my mind, our foreign policy responsibility, Mr. President, starts with a frank and undistorted look at the world. And the speakers at this General Assembly over the last 2 days have been unusually open in their endeavors here. And indeed, the global situation today is in any respect sobering. The fall of Kabul marks a turning point. We have achieved our goal of defeating those who wrought horrendous terror on this city 20 years ago. But despite immense endeavor and investment, we were not able in 20 years to establish a self-sustaining political order in Afghanistan. My country also shares responsibility, and we have an ongoing responsibility, particularly towards the many Afghans who had hoped for a more peaceful, free and democratic future. Yet I believe we need to ask ourselves, what conclusions do we draw from this failure? What lessons can we learn, and what tasks do we feel able to perform, having had to acknowledge that we wanted too much? I am convinced that resignation would be the wrong lesson to draw. To my mind, this moment of geopolitical disenchantment contains 3 messages for our foreign policy. We need to be more honest, smarter, but also stronger. Firstly, we need to be honest with regard to our options and our limits too. We need to be more realistic in defining and prioritizing our aims and interests. Often, ladies and gentlemen, we can achieve more when we want less. Secondly, we need to be smarter in choosing our instruments and in setting our priorities. German and European foreign policy must not restrict itself to being right and condemning others. we need to extend our toolbox: diplomatic, military, civilian, humanitarian. And for me, being smart also means less sense of mission and more openness in our endeavor to find potential solutions and common ground too, also with those who are different from us. And thirdly, even though some may find this paradoxical, we must get stronger when it comes to our means. The citizens in all our nations expect their governments to protect them from threat and attack, and rightly so. This is why in these unstable times my country too is investing more in its defense capability. But one thing is clear as well: future generations will not judge us on our military strength today, but on whether we were able to resolve problems and conflicts. Military strength without the will to forge understanding, without the courage to engage in diplomacy, does not make the world a more peaceful place. This is why we need strength at the negotiating table, just as we need strength in defense. And also, therefore, Germany shouldered responsibility over the last 2 years in the United Nations Security Council, and we would like to do so again in the years 2027-28. Excellencies, honored delegates, yes, we failed on many things in Afghanistan, but our failure should not be cause for Schadenfreude for others. And I'm deliberately using this German word that has made its way into many languages: Schadenfreude, a mindset in which loss to one is gain to another. Such a mindset fails to do justice to the reality of our interconnected world. Regional instability, weakening state structures, refugee and migrant flows, religious extremism and terror, new forms of conflict, hybrid, digital, environmental and resource-based conflicts. Such developments threaten us all, and we all must have to deal with them, small and large alike. The major powers, the US, China and Russia, shoulder a particular responsibility. A responsibility also for smaller states, because the privileges the major powers enjoy in the United Nations system are only justified as long as they promote and uphold the international peaceful order in the interest of all, and do not ignore or undermine it in pursuit of their own interests. The United Nations are not a boxing ring devoid of values at the disposal of the world powers. And I also do know that the hand pointing the finger at others has other fingers pointing back at ourselves. Those warning now about an American withdrawal should not succumb to similar reflexes at home. We Europeans and we Germans have to do more for our own security, need to do more for peace and stability in our neighborhood and around the world. We need to continue our multilateral efforts in Libya, in eastern Ukraine, in the Middle East. And we are ready to renew the nuclear agreement, and we call upon Iran to return to serious negotiations as quickly as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I know we are in agreement with our closest partner, France. We need a strong common foreign and security policy in Europe. Only a strong Europe can expect others to play their part too in building an international peaceful order. And only a strong Europe can do both at the same time: seek cooperation with China, where cooperation is in the interest of both sides, and indeed necessary, and at the same time demand China respects human rights and international law. and the legitimate interests of its neighbors. A strong, rules-based, peaceful order also needs a strong transatlantic partnership. We know that the US is setting new and different priorities, and we know that as the world changes, alliances also need to adapt. But no short-term advantage is worth causing cracks to appear in our transatlantic unity. We need to be mindful of that together. The responsibility of major powers, including us Europeans, weighs all the heavier when we call to mind the big global challenges, the major issues facing humanity. Never before have we had such an existential experience of our interdependence, our reliance on one another, as we have over the almost 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic. And yet, even though we know that this pandemic will only be over when it is over everywhere, when we take stock of global vaccine distribution, the picture is at best mixed. Too many people are still waiting for the life-saving vaccine. And this is why the distribution of vaccines must not be an instrument for countries to showcase themselves or grant tactical favors. The COVAX initiative under the auspices of the United Nations is the right way forward together, because it is our common way forward together. 1 in 3 COVAX vaccine doses is made available by Europe, and as the second largest donor worldwide, my country, with providing 2.5 billion euro, will make at least another 100 million doses available by the end of the year. And ladies and gentlemen, what holds true for the existential threat posed by the pandemic is just as true for climate change. Apocalyptic fires, scorching temperatures, tropical storms and hurricanes, failed harvests, drought and famine. They're happening now, they're happening here, and they pose a threat to people, families, livelihoods, everywhere, but especially to the most vulnerable, but also to the rich industrialized countries. Devastating floods in Western Germany this summer cost almost 200 of my compatriots their lives. And we also recall recent images from here, from New York City, of huge masses of water in streets, apartments, and subways. And against this dramatic backdrop, regression to the national egoisms I warn against is more than just a step back to the past. It is robbing us of our shared future. And it is harming the very institutions and instruments we now need. We need strong joint decisions shortly in Glasgow. After all, when it comes to climate change, it is also true that the gap between our ambitious goals and our concrete policies remains much too wide. And it is our job, it is our common job to close this gap, and we need to do it now. Because we live in an era in which humankind can irreversibly destroy living conditions on our planet. It is up to us, to our generation, to leave the future open for our children and grandchildren. We have to leave a future open in which climate and environmental protection, economic prosperity, a self-determined life in freedom, and social cohesion are all possible simultaneously. And this is, and I'm not using this lofty word lightly, this is our historic task. We must not fail. The future of humanity is at stake. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, I began my speech with democracy, the democratic transition unfolding in my country. As I draw to a close, I would like to widen the angle once more and consider the situation of liberal democracy as a whole, its credibility, its impact, its future, at this difficult geopolitical juncture. In Afghanistan, a long engagement which cost many lives has failed, but not the idea behind it. My country has a deep-set commitment to the idea of freedom and democracy, perhaps precisely because our German path to get there was long. Of course, we know, in reality, political systems will never be perfect. Not in Europe, not in America, not anywhere. Consequently, they can neither be exported nor, taking it further, imposed. I believe the task is a different one. It is not by missionary zeal we can render the best service to this tremendous idea, but by letting the strength of democracy shine through at home, by bringing democracy to bear in the daily lives of our citizens, and by resisting any authoritarian temptation. And only through that can we render the best service to this tremendous idea. President Biden spoke of the global power of democracy at the General Assembly. And I would like to underscore that democracy is not a force directed against anyone. It is not a Western instrument of political power. It is an open project, regardless of compass reading, geographical borders, regardless of skin color. It is the project for freedom, the project for human dignity that the states of the world have set as their yardstick in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And because this must remain our yardstick, for us Germans, even after the failure in Afghanistan, withdrawal from the world is not an option. While people are being robbed of their dignity, indifference is not an option. And this is why more realism in foreign policy does not mean less responsibility. It does not mean less ambition to make the world a better place. On the contrary, the inherent human yearning for freedom, dignity, and self-determination will never be extinguished anywhere. Doing justice to this human yearning instead of suppressing it, that is the real question defining our future in the 21st century. And this question will not be decided on any battlefield in our world. After all, the firepower of the most powerful army comes to an end. The long arm of the strongest state comes to an end. But the appeal of freedom and democracy in the hearts and minds of people lives on. And that is my firm belief. Thank you.